Good morning. Is this on? Can you hear me? Good. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Dunbar-Johnson, and as President International at the New York Times, it is my honor and privilege to welcome everyone to the New York Times Climate Forward and this special breakfast this morning, which we have entitled Conflicts of Interest, the Connection Between Hunger, Climate and Conflict. And it's hosted by our friends at the World Food Programme USA, for which we're very grateful. We're so glad to partner with the folks at the World Food Programme USA and to see this breakfast come to life ahead of our main stage programming upstairs. They brought forward an issue that is underprofiled, overlooked, and often misunderstood. As humanitarian events rage on throughout the world, we are all in need of a deeper understanding of the intersections among food security, climate, and conflict. It's hard to dispute that universal access to quality food is one of the central tenets of a healthy society. So this morning, we'll learn how the impact of extreme weather events on food security is having a disastrous knock-on effect. In vulnerable regions of the world, food insecurity is triggering conflict and migration. But while the effect of conflict on food insecurity is widely recognized, the reverse, the effect food insecurity has on creating conflict itself, is under-discussed. And that's why today's conversation matters. Our speakers are well qualified to educate us, but also to explore opportunities for building consensus around food security. If successful, such efforts can help reduce conflict and create greater stability in regions most at risk. And here at home in New York or in London, where I call home, today we'll hopefully leave here with a deeper understanding of how food security affects all regions, even if the conflict feels far away. So I hope I'll see many of you upstairs after this breakfast for a full day of live journalism on climate and its intersection with business, policy, culture, and much more. So welcome again, and thank you for being here. Thank you to our friends at the World Food Programme USA to bring this topic to Climate Forward and Climate Week here in New York City. And to kick off the session, please join me in welcoming Barron Segar, the President and CEO of the World Food Programme USA. Barron.
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for joining us for this incredible breakfast. I want to give a shout out to my team at the World Food Programme USA. If everybody with the World Food Programme USA could stand up and be recognizing all your difficult questions will go to this team. Also, thanks New York Times and our colleagues at the World Food Programme. I'm Barron Segar. I'm the President and CEO of the World Food Programme USA. We're the 501c3 affiliate working to secure a world without hunger in the United States. And we do that by amplifying the voices, the stories of those who are hungry. We do it through partnerships, whether it's the New York Times or companies and faith-based organizations or our policymakers. To put it another way, we're here to rally. We're rallying you, we're rallying people around the world, people in the United States, to get behind the World Food Programme, and more importantly, to do something about it, to do something about food and hunger. I think most of you know food is not in short supply. Matter of fact, there's enough food to go around the world to feed everybody. What is in short supply is the political will, the humanitarian access, and funding. Those three things prohibit us from securing food for those who are the hungriest around the world. I remember not long ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, we actually were seeing hunger declining, and I think it's important for us to remember that. Hunger was in a decline. Unfortunately, today, We have the highest level of hunger in modern history, and so it's a challenge that we have to address head on. I think a lot of you, I know a lot of you have traveled to the field, and I think for me, when I traveled to the field, I remember the stories of meeting young people, particularly young women, young boys, and you ask them what they want to be, and they want to be astronauts, and they want to be policemen and policymakers and presidents. It's really amazing. So our job is to make sure that all those dreams come true. So today, again, we're going to think big. We're going to think about food and security. We're going to connect the dots between hunger, conflict, and climate. The video that you saw, and by the way, with thanks to The Weeknd, who gave us a song of his to use tied to our video, it is a reminder about the potential of all of us, the potential particularly of young people, but it starts with food. It starts with a plate of food. And with a plate of food, with young people, more dreams are going to come true. We're going to see young people that are going to become astronauts and teachers and the presidents of their countries. So again, our job is to make sure that access everywhere is made possible. But we are in a dangerous place, and I think we all know this because we're all tied to food and food insecurity here. So my ask is that please go on this journey with us at the World Food Program and the World Food Program USA to bring peace and prosperity to the world, to bring access to food, to make sure that all people everywhere have a right to food and have access to food. I'm also grateful for those in the room that are policymakers, our private sector partners, because we can't do it alone, and we need solutions around hunger. And you're going to hear that this morning. So again, thank you for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to invite to the stage George Stroumboulopoulos. He's a Canadian music producer, broadcaster, writer, podcaster, and filmmaker. I think I've covered everything with those three. His career in media has ranged from primetime news shows, late night music and sports. He currently hosts a show called Strombo, which I actually listen to, George, so thank you for that. Airs in 165 different countries. He's also a member of Canada's Order of Canada, a board member of Artists for Peace and Justice, and by the way, the World Food Program's longest serving global goodwill ambassador, so thank you. And his first guest is Rania Dagash-Kamara. She is Assistant Executive Director of Partnerships and Innovation at the World Food Program. This is, by the way, a really big job. She leads the organization's engagement and resource mobilization with global partners, international financial institutions, and programs. She also oversees the work that the World Food Program does around innovation, which is really key right now for solving hunger. She oversees offices and previously in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and currently is at our UN headquarters. She's been doing this for well over 25 years. She was 10 years old when she started. But I would say, Rania, listen, most importantly, thank you for your friendship, the love, the passion that you show the world, and welcome to the stage.
It's lovely to be with you all this morning, especially when you're dealing with climate. I prefer to do it early in the day where you're still hopeful and optimistic. I'm relatively fresh off the ice sheet in Greenland, and the climate scientists I was up there with were saying you always want to go early if you're meeting around climate, because by the end of the day, it's just despair. We hope it won't just be despair today. There'll be lots of positivity. Rania, it's lovely to see you. There's so much we can cover in the next 10 minutes or so that we have together. Why don't you start by painting a picture for us, the story about hunger today, the trends that you're seeing, and maybe some of the obstacles, the bigger ones that we're facing today.
Thank you very much, George. An absolute pleasure and delight to be with you. And Barron, I especially liked what you said about my age. I get more sensitive as I age. But the reality, actually, for us in the World Food Program, I think is simple. Every year we see hunger increase, which is why I am extremely grateful for this table, especially. We did it last year and we're repeating it this year. Because as we bask in our privilege, and many of us today are privileged, you still make the time this early in the morning to come in and listen to the global pains around hunger. And for that, a massive thank you. Every year we've been seeing the hunger, acute hunger, and that is people who are unable to have a meal a day, rise. It was about 90 just before COVID million, and it stands at over 300 million today. These are people who are this close to starvation across the globe. And there is enough food, but we are seeing the largest number of conflicts in the world than we have ever seen since the Second World War. We are seeing floods wash out crops, droughts kill livestock. We are seeing the agricultural system, which is on the front lines for many of these countries, get totally obliterated by the frequency of the climatic shocks. And then we are seeing the economic and socioeconomic effects of COVID, actually, and the debt burden on many countries unable to feed their children. So every year it goes up. Even as we put more into it, it goes up. And I think the challenges are, I'll summarize it. I was in Kabul last week in Afghanistan. And I went to visit a health center that we support for children and mothers who are malnourished. One of the most difficult moments for me was at the end of the day when we had to send back mothers with children because we couldn't take any more after a certain point. We don't have the funds to do it. And I have one mother with 8 children in tow. She'd just been pushed out of Pakistan back into Afghanistan, lost her livelihood, her husband's not working, the last 2 malnourished, and she needs us to feed them, and we can't. She herself was a fraction of herself. But we had to send her away. And she didn't leave, like many other mothers. They stayed queuing, and they may overnight at that health center because it guarantees that the next morning she will meet the batch that we can cover. And I've never seen us this strapped for funding as I do this year. Normally we cover the needs because many of you are generous. Many of the governments who support us have been generous. So that's a big one. Access, I would say, has been problematic. I am from Sudan. To have a famine in my country, in the west side, when we have a bumper harvest in the north and we're unable to connect the two because fighting parties won't let us cross, because our trucks get attacked as they approach the famine area and they won't let us in. We lost 3 drivers who were just parked to get food in to Darfur about 2 months ago. So it's a grim picture, but nonetheless a hopeful one because you are at the table. And many of you can reinforce the narrative about global hunger. Many of you can help even in your own communities. If you have home countries you link to or heritage, please support, whether it's your voice or your resources. Just put it into hunger because it invokes a lot of instability and pain and conflict, and I'll come to that.
Covering this for decades, there was always an understanding that humanitarians could and should and often did have access. What's changing? Why is that changing? Because it's one of the most treacherous times.
It is. I think what is changing is, I don't even want to say it's greed, but I think the lust for power amongst warring parties has desensitized humans to those who want to rule. I mean, I speak even in my own country. There are 2 generals fighting who've pushed my mother as to become a refugee. None of us can explain why these 2 generals, other than they want to rule the country, have forced 25 million into acute hunger. A country that has and can harvest, a country that is able to feed some of its neighbors when it is stable and working. But today, I think the lust to power, whether it is that or to control, we are seeing that international humanitarian law, the right to access, unfettered access for humanitarian agencies is violated. They just don't listen. We've been meeting governments all over the General Assembly to say, help us speak to the warring parties in every conflict. Allow us in. And they don't listen. I mean, even in Gaza, we have trucks lined all over Gaza. We can put in 600 trucks a day, but we're only able to get 100 in a day. And that's not a physical barrier. So I don't know if I have the answer, George. All I know is that we need more voices and more pressure. And it was the New York Times last year who put out an article on Sudan who changed the pressure and the levers of that on some of the warring parties to let us in just a bit more. So voices count, journalism counts, all of you count.
Something Stephen and Barron said, that phrase, hunger driving conflict. We've, for the longest time, heard it expressed in the opposite way. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
The French Revolution was over bread, some would argue over cake. One of the biggest things that governments fear, I think, George, is rising bread prices, because it instigates revolutions, it instigates anger, and it instigates people coming out on the street, and it changes governments. And that's what happened in Sudan. It was the rise in bread prices that had the youth hit the streets, and soon it became such a massive cycle that it induced the instability also that we are in today. So food security is national security. You know, political actors care about that there is food on table, bread at minimum on table, so that populations don't rise against them. And where it isn't offered, it causes instability. Where I often make the link to the private sector, governments understand this for the most part, but the private sector, who we would like to see come in more into this space, if you need to expand your businesses, I mean, Africa today has the largest youth bulge. Every 1 in 6 consumers over the next 20 years is going to be on the African continent. You want your markets to expand and you want to make more, then stabilize the continent and help us put food on table to create stability so businesses can flourish. I think there's a direct link there, and there's a direct fundamental one, which is our moral obligation, I think, to each other. So if we stabilize, then it's less migration, it's less death, it's less children crossing these oceans and dying. There's just so much benefit in each other's growth and support. So that's, I think, where the direct link is. My boss, Cindy McCain, often goes to security conferences and people are confused. I mean, you're a food humanitarian. What the hell are you doing in, security conferences? It is this link. National security is linked to food security.
Rania, thank you so much. Thank you. As Rania said, people wondered why Cindy McCain, the executive director, would show up at these kinds of events. A part of it's because of a shift in the way we've looked at this stuff. Chase, what drove the United Nations World Food Program into linking hunger and conflict in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd be able to follow Rania well in this area. I think she articulated it so perfectly. But my job is mostly working with Capitol Hill, right? We're convincing lawmakers in the United States to contribute to the mission of the United Nations World Food Program. And the way that we've done that in the past, and the most compelling ways to do that, is to come in and see those lawmakers and ask them one of 3 things. Do you think this is morally right to provide aid? Do you think it's economically smart to provide aid? And increasingly, is it in the national security interest of the United States to do so? I think for the first maybe 20 years after the turn of the century, it was only those first 2 pillars. Yep. It was, we do this because it represents what's best about the American people, or we do it because it opens up markets for American consumers and American products. But there's been a shift. I don't want to call it the securitization of aid. I think that's a dangerous road to go down. But there certainly are people who are acknowledging this link between food and conflict in a way that they haven't before. The work that we've done at the World Food Program USA comes in 2 reports. I encourage you to take a look at these things. This is Winning the Peace, Hunger and Instability, and Dangerously Hungry. This looks at this literature really closely, the ways that conflict is driven by hunger around the planet.
With that third pillar coming up more often, do you get a sense there's comprehension and they're really understanding this?
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's not just our voices telling them. It's not, as Rania said, it's not just the executive director of the World Food Program coming into a security conference. Flagging her on the left and right will be someone from the military, someone who has experience in dealing with and deploying American soft power effectively. And we don't want to link our aid programs, and we don't want the World Food Program to be an extension of the U.S. national security apparatus. Right. We want to create that distance. That harms humanitarians. These folks go in with really clear objectives of impartiality and neutrality, et cetera. So it's a line we don't want to cross, but we do want to make sure it's clear to folks that that food is national security for lawmakers particularly.
Michael, your research shows that extreme weather will obviously affect crop cycles and yields, and that will trigger all kinds of ripple effects around the globe. When you look at where we are with conflict and all this, what are you projecting? What are you seeing coming?
Yeah, I mean, I initially think about systemic risk and the potential for these ripple effects. But to take a step back, I mean, one report that is clear in my mind was this report from 1976. It was Grain Reserves, a potential U.S. policy tool. And the nice thing about that, it was in response to the weather shocks in 1972 to 74 that led to spikes in food prices back in the 70s, and also the great grain robbery the Soviet Union had from the US. But that report actually laid out a strategy for how reserves might be used to first protect sort of the domestic food supply in the United States, but more importantly, a strategy or scenarios for how the U.S. would respond to the situation in terms of its exports abroad. And so this sort of highlights the issue of systemic risk. So we're worried about shocks that occur, particularly in major grain-producing regions, that can lead to trade restrictions. So in 2007, 2008, we saw spikes in food prices, and this led to outbreak of conflict around the world, same in 2010. And then the great concern in the Ukraine war, and that's why we saw the Black Sea Grain Initiative, the Solidarity Line out of the west border of Ukraine. So at least some recognition that we need international cooperation to try and deal with the potential for ripple effects. So the real mechanism that we're concerned about is spikes in food prices that then lead to instability. And so that's our main concern, and we need tools and approaches to try and deal with that potential for spikes.
Are you getting a sense of the kinds of conflicts that could emerge that would put an even greater stress on our reality today?
I think there's been some nice work to try to identify choke points in our food system, vulnerable infrastructure, threats to transportation networks. This is the type of information that we need going forward. So understanding areas that are so important or critical for our food systems. And it could be not directly related. So our food systems rely on networks of networks, energy networks, financial networks. So that's where the opportunity, sort of a positive about this, is that we have the data, we have analytical capabilities to understand these complex systems, but we need to invest in that. And so that's where the sort of hope is. We have these complex dynamic systems that we don't fully understand, but we have potential to improve our understanding and response.
But with extreme weather being more prevalent, you're seeing how this could trigger significant problems if we don't figure that out.
That's right. And I mean, to make this sort of more tangible, you might be familiar with Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And the thinking fast is the concern. So people's sort of knee-jerk reaction, policymakers, we're all humans, right? And so if you see food prices spike, if you see instability in the markets, your sort of initial reaction is to protect your domestic markets. That's your sort of maybe fundamental responsibility. But the implications of that could be disastrous for our global food system, and particularly the countries that are import dependent, have less financial resources, have less trade connections. So with that in mind, we have to understand the human psychology of the situation, and we do. We do understand these things. So that's where we can improve our policies to address how people react to different situations.
Right, Caitlin. We've talked about food insecurity, conflict drivers for that from a variety of angles. Under your leadership, your organization has scrutinized this. Can you give an example in the climate context of how a climate shock has made a situation even more destabilized and created greater conflict?
Certainly. So I'll give an example there, and then I'll take that question from a couple of different angles. A short answer to your question is, for example, looking at the Horn of Africa, where by 2022, countries in the Horn of Africa had experienced 4 successive droughts, the worst drought in the region since 1981, which Rania knows quite well, leading to high levels of acute food insecurity and coinciding with violence in the region, ranging from transnational terrorism to war. So that's a relatively short answer to your question. But I want to look at it in 2 different ways. First, looking at the impacts of climate change on food security. Oftentimes when we think about those impacts, one image that will come to mind would be, a field with dried soil and nothing growing. In addition to that, you can have things like swarms of locusts, like we saw in 2019 and 2020, swarms of tens of billions of locusts affecting agriculture and livelihoods and reducing the availability of food in countries in the Middle East and across Africa. Or looking at, for example, impacts of extreme heat. There was a study that was published in 2023 looking at evidence from 150 countries showing that when temperatures rise, the productivity decreases and wages decrease, with impacts on household food security. So I just want to say, in addition to that image of a field with a dried field, you have impacts of biotic threats like locusts on agriculture. And in addition to impacts of agriculture on food security, you could have impacts of things like heat on food security for populations.
So and it's not just the big obvious ones, but it's all these little micro experiences.
There are a lot of nuances, which is why a lot of the biggest studies on the relationship of climate change to food security show that there are few, if any, aspects of food security that are untouched by climate change. And then the other thing that you mentioned was relationship of conflict to food security. The important thing here is that it's bidirectional. So throughout history, food insecurity has influenced social unrest, political unrest, and violence, from the French Revolution to the Tiananmen Square uprising to the Arab Spring. And then also in the other direction, violence always influences food security, looking at the 2 places where famine has been confirmed in the world today, in Sudan and Gaza, 2 places experiencing war.
Michael, a phrase that it's up for debate if people like, but the global south disproportionately is affected by these kinds of realities. And that, of course, not just hunger and conflict, but migration. When you take a look at we're in the United States, and when people, as you said, tend to look at themselves and protect themselves first, what kind of implications is this going to have on the United States?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, right? People, when they see people suffering hunger, I think across the board, wherever you are on the political spectrum, I think that you immediately relate to that situation, and I think that's for me, that's the opportunity. So it's about communication of the fact that when you have instability and that connection with conflict and hunger, that there's an opportunity there to make a difference. And I think what we need to highlight for people is that supplying food provides stability, and that's a pathway to ensuring that people are in a better situation around the world. So, for example, one of the key responses, human responses to food insecurity, is to move. That's sort of throughout history. We know, that you go through the stages, and when you reach a certain point, that's your last resort. And that's something that we have to communicate a little bit better, that people understand this connection between food insecurity, social stability, and migration.
I think a large part it's also how we talk about it and how we communicate stories. Rania. Ready to share.
Say something I forgot.
Yes.
And I have
Microphone here?
the physical one.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
In this drought that actually Caitlin referred to, I saw fathers selling their daughters in that drought to survive. And they marry them as kids because child brides bring higher prices. But you know what worked in that context and was positive? School meals. If we provided school meals, the parents and the kids stayed in the location and weathered the climate change because the kids were fed. They moved to feed the kids. And so it was significantly important that where we maintained it, the people stayed and didn't migrate, didn't move, didn't starve. Where we didn't, it was masses of movement. But it's a hopeful story.
It's a hopeful story.
Well, just to connect, like trying to understand, when we try to understand migration and refugee movements, it's about understanding the push and pull factors. And if people have those resources, they will stay in place. And so the opportunity, again, like thinking about, whoa, what can we do? Well, we have better systems in place to understand how people might move. We understand the data, the drivers of migration, and that's where I think there's a lot of hope.
Caitlin, I'll ask you this, but also Chase pop in because it deals with policymakers. Aside from your research, you also have experience, real world experience as a policymaker. When you're trying to make the case for why a robust food security initiative is important, how would you do that and why would you do that?
Well, there have been presidents recently who have stated explicitly that investing in food security in other countries is in the U.S. moral interest. It's a moral imperative, economic imperative, and national security imperative, as Chase alluded to. When it comes to the national security argument, I like to get a little bit more specific about the links between food insecurity abroad and the importance of addressing food insecurity abroad and U.S. national security interests. I see those links in three ways. First is, as Michael was mentioning, the relationship of food insecurity to unplanned migration, which is complex, as some of our research has shown, but there is a link there. Another relationship that we talk about is the relationship of food insecurity to social unrest, political unrest, and conflict, as we've also talked about. But the third thing that I think is really important is something that I call the bad actor phenomenon, where bad actors capitalize on food insecurity in certain regions to achieve their goals. And those bad actors are often strategic adversaries of the United States. Plenty of examples out there from Nicolas Maduro exchanging food for votes in Venezuela, ISIS co-opting food distribution points in Syria, or on a global scale, because agriculture markets are globalized to the extent that they are today, you see the possibility of a country like Russia capitalizing on food insecurity that Russia itself is causing through its war in Ukraine, and having influence through increased food trade and deliveries of free food and free fertilizer to many countries in Africa. So lots of examples of those bad actor phenomenon. And in all of those cases, the U.S. can often achieve some of its foreign policy goals by improving food security in some of those countries that I mentioned. You know,
America's foreign policy landscape has shifted quite a bit over the years. You have to deal with this on a daily basis when you're trying to reach people. Everything we're talking about here is logical. It's logical. It makes sense. People listen to it, and then there's this disconnect where you try to sit back and think, how come we can't communicate this? And there are a variety of reasons. So when you're talking to them, and you'll hear things like America first, how does that impact what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I've been in so many rooms over the last 6 months talking about the future of U.S. engagement with the world, talking about the impacts of the dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development. And this isn't the first time that the U.S. government or other donor governments around the world have questioned the value of international engagement, have questioned the effectiveness of international aid programs. This is not the first time we've been through this as a nation. What is different is that I think this conversation has been pared back to really fundamental questions about who we are as an American people. Are we a moral nation? Do we still fundamentally believe in the power of soft power, right? Do we value human life equally, no matter where it is or where these people live? So I think that we're in this moment where, yes, they're very tangible and events that are affecting human dignity. But at the same time, we're back to first principles. We need to start having arguments that I think we can win, frankly, about why these programs mattered in the first place. And as we look to rebuild, we got to bring the evidence to the table. We've got to say this is moral, economic, and national security. Here is the reasons why we do these things. Here is the reason that the American people have responded in the past. The World Food Program is one of the best examples. We've got an easy story to tell. This is an organization that was born out of U.S. interest in helping to feed the world back in the 1950s in the aftermath of the Second World War. We are so closely tied as a nation with the birth of the World Food Program that when we go up and have conversations with lawmakers, we've got to remind them that, right? That they're in a long line of bipartisan leaders who have chosen to dedicate themselves to this cause.
This is a Nobel Peace Prize winning organization, an honor some presidents are desperate to get. Desperate to get, right? You'd think that
no comment.
You'd think that this could be a bounce.
Yeah.
As a Canadian, I feel fine saying that. But these are fundamental questions that you're asking, and I'm sure. The other night we listened to the former ambassador to the United Nations talking about it used to be easy to talk to somebody about this, and they'll say we care. She says now the response is we don't care, and there's a big shift here. Michael, the iron rule of ecology is everything is connected. So what we're talking about here, you're talking about conflict, you're talking about hunger, you're talking about climate. People need to look at all the things as they work together. Are there institutions in place that can do this?
I mean, the problem is, and this is the challenge we faced, not just this administration, prior administrations, that we don't have any institution that's in place to deal with systemic risk. And looking at global food insecurity from a system perspective, again, coming back to the Ukraine war and the conflict, the concern about the loss of grains coming out of the Black Sea region, the loss of fertilizer from Belarus and Russia, you need to understand from a global systems perspective, but the USDA, it's not under their mandate necessarily. The State Department, it's not their mandate. So we have this institutional gap. What we need to recognize, really, it's a new problem, and you create institutions to solve problems. So our former institutions weren't created to solve that sort of systemic risk problem. And so that's, I think, another sort of opportunity from a government standpoint that we need to have an institution that sees maybe global stability, food security at the global level as their mandate.
We only have 30 seconds. This room here, what can they do? What should they do?
For the Americans, I would talk to your lawmakers that represent your states. That's my quick answer. Chase, I'm curious to see what you would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're learning is that this is a sort of all hands on deck moment, and we really need. I mean, there are opportunities, and I would reiterate this. Head to WFPUSA.org. Look at ways to get involved with grassroots engagement, grassroots advocacy. We're constantly putting out opportunities for people to be able to reach out to their lawmakers directly, and we'll make that as easy as possible for you to do. The other thing is, if you're a young person or you have a young person in your life, we encourage you to get involved with the Zero Hunger Generation, which is a new movement through the World Food Program USA that allows young people to find volunteer opportunities, to earn some resume building opportunities. We want to build the next generation of humanitarians that are going to help tackle some of these bigger problems.
Right on. Chase, Michael, Caitlin, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.